My name is Palanivel Thiagarajan and I am the MLA for Madurai Central Constituency representing the DMK party. I am here today to help discuss a report I have been preparing over the last 3 to 4 weeks, reviewing the state of Tamil Nadu's finances in anticipation of the budget session which is due to start in a few days. I have titled this report, Drowning in Debt and the Worst is Yet to Come. I want to go over a few points in the course of this presentation. And before I do that, I want to explain to you why I created this report. On the 1st of February 2017, the government of Tamil Nadu laid on the table of the House a report that is required under the Tamil Nadu Fiscal Responsibility Act. This report showed the trend of expenditure and receipts over the first 6 months of the budget year. This report was quite alarming to me. It showed a state of affairs that was much worse than I had anticipated. The second reason I'm doing this report is because the leader of my party, opposition party leader, as well as the working president of the DMK, through M.K. Stalin, had his own analysis done and showed that the state's finances were in very bad shape. He therefore asked me to dig a lot deeper into the historical data and uncover how and why we arrived at this place. You may have also noticed in the last week or so some mentions in the newspaper about some aspects of the state's financial dilemma. For example, that the public distribution system, or the ration shops as we know them, are not able to supply goods like dal and palm oil because the procurement contracts are not being executed due to lack of liquidity. Finally, my own colleagues as MLAs and former MLAs and government workers who are due pensions from the government of Tamil Nadu have been in touch with me and explained that reimbursements from the Legislative Assembly Department, which is for travel allowance, medical charges, etc., are being experienced in terms of checks that are paid which are not honored by the banks. In other words, the Legislative Assembly Department's checks are being turned back from banks. Simultaneously, pensions that ought to be paid are not being paid for ex-MLAs and government workers, or in some cases being paid in 2 different monthly installments. Now, I don't expect that the fate of MLAs and their payments are of common concern to most people, and rightly so, they shouldn't be, especially those MLAs who were recently locked up in a resort for several days. On the other hand, as I have said in the past, if people with access to the sources of power and sources of government, like MLAs and retired MLAs, find themselves in this bad a situation, then surely common people must find their situation even worse. So for all these reasons, I chose to make this report. And in order to make it easier to digest, I have broken this report into 5 simple pieces. For those who have never analyzed a budget before and don't understand the components, I have 2 different sections that will help to provide an introduction. The first is called How to Analyze Budgets, and the second is called Responsible Financial Management. That is, what is the gold standard for how to manage the finances of an entity like the state of Tamil Nadu, or for that matter, the country of India. And then I have 2 sections which analyze the performance of Tamil Nadu finances from both the revenue account perspective, or the current account perspective, as well as the fiscal account perspective, which is the long-term investment and debt account perspective. And finally, I have a section that concludes the full analysis by reiterating where we stand today and what we expect to see in the future. The first scope of analysis in any budget is called revenue receipts and revenue expenditures. That is current year income and current year expenditure. For a government like that of Tamil Nadu, there are basically 4 sources of income or receipts. 1, the state's own tax revenues, which is largely commercial taxes, things like VAT. 2, the state's non-tax revenues, which is things like registration fees for land transactions or automobile registrations. 3, the state share of taxes that are collected by the central government and sent back, like income taxes and service taxes. And lastly, central government funding for certain specific programs or schemes which are called grants in aid. These are the four main sources of revenue from a current account perspective for any state. In terms of expenses, there are 5 or 6 categories. First is salary and allowances for government servants, MLAs, etc. Second is pensions and retirement benefits. Third is what we call non-wage operations and maintenance, which is electric bills, maintenance, routine maintenance to keep buildings and assets functional, equipment functional, etc. Fourth, by far the largest and most important, subsidies and transfers, that is the government programs like free laptops or the public distribution system. Fifth, interest payments, that is payments that are due for debt already incurred by the government. And lastly, any other sources of income. The next aspect is what we call fiscal accounts or capital accounts. Now, in this case, there may be 2 variations. The first is called revenue surplus variation, and that is when your revenue receipts are greater than your revenue expenditures, so you actually have a revenue surplus, and you use that to fund capital expenditures, including some additional borrowing. So for example, in this case, where you have a revenue surplus, which is the model that most of the DMK governments have followed, you increase the debt a little bit, borrow, add it to your revenue surplus, and use that for capital investments like roads, bridges, power plants, factories, sewage schemes, etc. On the other hand, if, like the ADMK government has done the last 2 years and is projecting to do this year, if you run a revenue deficit, that is to say that you have spent more this year than you earned this year, then you first have to borrow to fix this deficit, fix the revenue deficit, and then whatever you have left of your borrowing, you can invest in capital investments, like in this case, roads or factories. This is, of course, a much less preferred model, because if you borrow to finance current account deficits, you are unlikely to get any growth benefit and therefore future benefits from this. Whereas if you invest in infrastructure and investment of capital, you will in fact get future benefits from this. Now, I realize this is going a bit long, but I want to wrap this in 2 or 3 slides. We have already discussed, therefore, what is a revenue account or current year account. Receipts, which come from 4 categories: tax and non-tax revenues, central share of taxes, as well as grants. Expenditures, that are salaries, pensions, operations and maintenance, schemes, and net interest. A capital account, which is the revenue surplus or deficit plus investments, and these investments can sometimes be direct investments, sometimes they're net loans or advances which are given to wholly owned corporations like the State Transport Corporation or the TNEB to help build assets on its balance sheet. 2 other terms to be really clear about in terms of financial analysis. The first is called retail inflation, which is the price at which, or the rate at which the cost of living goes up year over year, and therefore at some level the rate at which the value of a rupee drops year over year. Now, this is an important statistic because the way we measure a state's economic progress is called GSDP, Gross State Domestic Product. And in most years, from a current year perspective, this GSDP will be measured only in notional rupees or current rupees, because current income, current expenses, current investment is all in today's rupees. However, if we really want to know how much the state has grown, we must take out the effects of inflation or the lowering in value of the rupee and calculate what's known as real GSDP growth. So we need to know what is retail inflation in order to calculate rate of GSDP growth. However, when we do calculations of GSDP, we do it only in today's rupees, because all other budget terms are also in today's rupees. So if you look at this overall from a performance perspective, the questions are, is there a revenue surplus or is there a revenue deficit? In other words, do receipts exceed expenditures or vice versa? You must remember that as debt goes up, interest payments go up. And as interest payments are part of revenue expenditures, every time you have interest payments go up, you either squeeze other programs that the state can spend on, or you increase your revenue deficit. Similarly, the fiscal deficit for our simple analysis is just equal to the capital spending less the revenue surplus, or the capital spending plus the revenue deficit which has to be financed. And the long-term debt of the state, or the overall debt level of the state, simply increases every year by the amount of fiscal deficit that you get. And as the debt goes up, then the interest goes up. and then you have a chance of greater deficit next year because you have more interest to pay next year. With that, I conclude this basic introduction to how to analyze a budget, what are the terms, and how they all fit together.